Welcome back to I Awaken, the space where we unplug from the performative version of spirituality and plug into the real thing presence, clarity, and alignment. Today, we are getting into something that sounds simple but honestly changes everything the art of hearing God, and specifically how to cultivate an MP atmosphere. A way of living and leading where you don't just believe God speaks, you actually learn how to recognize the voice. Today, my guest is Caleb Matthews. Caleb's been on this path for a long time. He grew up curious about the unseen, the spiritual, the symbolic, the what does this mean side of life. That curiosity took him everywhere, from New Age festivals to Bible colleges, from leadership circles to international radio. He has spoken to thousands around the world, built businesses, interpreted thousands of dreams, and sat with people across every background skeptics, believers, seekers, leaders, all trying to find clarity and breakthrough. And what I love about Caleb is he doesn't make this weird or unreachable. He tells the truth with humor, connects the dots across history and culture, and brings spiritual principles down to earth so you can actually use them on a random Tuesday. So, if you've ever wondered, is that God or is that my anxiety? Or why is it so hard to hear anything when life is loud? Or how do I stop chasing signs and start building a relationship? Yeah, this episode is your lane. Caleb, welcome to I Awaken.
Thank you, Archita. I'm really excited about today's episode. I appreciate you having me on. It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, the pleasure is all mine, and I'm really looking forward to dive into this conversation with you. So let's start with the basics, Caleb. When we say MP atmosphere, it sounds pretty powerful. But what does MP actually mean to you in real life?
Mm. MPA, what that means to me personally is multiple perspective advantage. And what I mean by that is seeing life through the lens of just outside of what's in front of me in the here and now. It's good to be present. It's something I try to cultivate on a day by day basis. I encourage your audience to cultivate being present, but being present alone is not enough. And I'll explain more about what I mean. Being present is good, but it's only a part of the picture. For us to have true MPA perspective, we need to understand and really treasure and steward the history that speaks of where we've come from, our generational past, the baton that's been passed down to us, and also where we're going, what our vision casting is, what is in front of us. And it's very difficult to have a cultivated MPA if I and if we as individuals are only focused on what's happening next in front of us versus really stepping outside of that. I'll give a practical, real life example. And many people out in the audience listening and ourselves, we've been to the movie theater. I'll use a movie theater as an example. And in the movie theater, you have the person that sells you the ticket when you step in the door. You have the security guard that watches the building. You have the other audience members who are sitting in the audience watching the movie. And you have the movie that you're watching in and of itself. You have the concession of people who are selling drinks and food. There's that. But if we stay in life as a movie theater, then we're gonna be playing the game that everybody else is playing in that perspective. But sometimes we have to shift from that theater. We have to step outside that theater to get true MPA and be in a different theater and not play the same game that the 99% of everybody else is playing. Because if we're all in the same theater, we're not going to see what's outside the theater. We're not going to see the sign on the end of the highway that's pointing the way to the theater. We're not going to see the highway that leads to other cities and other municipalities and other places. I use that as a simple example just to encourage myself and us as well that to get true MPA, sometimes it requires, many times it requires shifting away from our atmosphere, stepping outside the theater of what everybody else is doing and forge a new path.
Wow, that is one very good analogy that you shared, Caleb. I truly appreciate it, and it makes the concept so much more easier to understand for me. I'm sure the listeners can relate to it as well. Like you said, that life is much more than a movie theater. And yeah, to so MPA is important to expand our perspectives and get into the other spheres of life. So yeah, that totally makes sense. But let's say if someone's listening and thinking that cool concept, but I live in chaos. So what's the first micro shift that they can make today to step into MPA?
Mm. That shift begins, I would say, from a stepping back from the chaos and making a conscious decision within our SSB. And that's something I want to expound on here, our spirit, soul, and body. Each one of us has a trichotomous construct. We have a spirit that has a mind, that has a body. And when there's chaos and we feel like chaos in our life and environment from others, from circumstances are overwhelming us, it's because we are honed in on the dichotomous worldview, which is mind and body without the spirit. And the way that we address chaos is by taking authority and governing and dominion over our soul and our body via our spirit, via our influence, via our consciousness, and really speaking to our soul. We see in the scriptures, David in the Psalms talks about, "Why, oh my soul, are you downcast?" Well, who's talking? It's not David's soul talking to his soul. It's not his mind talking to its mind his mind, it's his spirit talking to his soul. And the spirit can only be accelerated in its growth and its depth and its influence by being in subjection to God, to the great spirit, to the creator of the universe. And when we find ourselves in chaos, it's because, and I'm speaking to myself too, it's because we're looking too far into that theater that I spoke of before, that dichotomous worldview of being caught up in life that exists without partnership with God. And so I would say practically the way that we step outside the chaos is to speak to our soul, because we have the ability to train our soul, to train our subconscious, because our subconscious scientifically will listen to us whether we are speaking positivity or negativity over it. So some practical examples is, okay, God, I see the chaos in my life, but I speak to the storms to be still, because peace is a byproduct of relationship with God, and chaos is not of God. So therefore, I speak peace to the chaos in my life. I step back and I recognize that I'm in chaos, but you are not the author of chaos. So we go higher. We appeal to a higher law, which is God, which is spirit.
Yeah, that's huge because you just made it very practical. You're basically saying that this isn't about having a perfect life. It's about building a better inner environment, no matter how much chaos exists in the outside. And like you said, building a healthy connection with God as uh, is very important. So that brings me to the question that most people say they want to hear God, but they're afraid of getting it wrong or of getting the wrong signal, you know. So what's the biggest misconception about hearing God according to you?
The greatest misconception that I find when it comes to hearing God and deciphering his voice is that it has to be some grand production. And what I mean by that is it comes back to our soul again. And that is, in our culture, in our world, we have been trained from a very young age that anything that's worth listening to or seeing or experiencing has to be this big Disneyland, theater, Broadway performance, the stage of excitement or entertainment. We are very much in an entertainment-based world because of the entertainment industry, because of social media. And hearing the voice of God doesn't have to be in bright lights. In fact, in very few times do we find that God's voice and hearing God's voice appears in the bright lights. And I'll explain just what I mean by that. We know that a story in the Old Testament of Elijah, the story of Elijah when he goes to a cave and he sees God's hand move. First of all, before he sees God's hand move and his voice move, he sees the earth. He feels the earthquake. He sees the lightning and the thunder, and he sees the fire. And through each step, it says that God was not in the fire. God was not in the thunder. God was not in the earthquake. And then at the very end, came a whisper and came God's small, still voice. And then God was in the still, small voice. I share that to emphasize this, is that deciphering the voice of God, the majority of the time, in my experience and my perspective of history, speaking especially through the Bible, especially through human history, is that God reveals himself in the small nudges, in the inner nudges, in the everyday interactions of human life. That's where God can be found. And to encourage our audience where to start is in the small things, because that's where God's nature and character is. That's where God is. God's not on the stage of the soul. God is in the inner reflections of the human heart, in the quietness of the stillness in those moments of meditation in the bedroom. He's in the walk in the park with the animals. He's sitting on the bridge looking out over the city. He's in those moments, in those still small voice moments. And that is where I think the great misconception is that God has to be found on a stage, like an entertainment show, like American Idol or The Voice, right? God is found in the small things, in the little things, in the character building moments, because we know that in history, as history is spoken, anybody that ever changed history, entrepreneurs, inventors, leaders, people of faith, they all began their humble beginnings in the stillness, in the smallness, in the little things. And that's, if nothing else comes across to our audience today, it's the little things. Start with the little things and grow on those things. That is where you'll begin to accelerate and be developed in hearing God's voice.
That is absolutely true. And I think that might have been the realest thing that I've heard in a very, very long time. A lot of people glorify these things that, God, like you said, that God can be found on some high pedestal or something. But in reality, God is in the everyday moments of our, daily lives. He's in the smallest of things that people often ignore. So definitely, I think the way to actually hear God is by starting with the smaller things. But how do you personally tell the difference between God's voice, your own thoughts, and fear dressed up as intuition? Because people, get confused about that a lot.
Mm. That is where we must take a census of our senses. And just to go over that really briefly, a census in ancient times was when the entire nation or the entire world would be called into an account for being taxed. I use the example, since we're in Christmas season, of the nativity story. And, in that time, the Roman Empire ruled the world. And there was a time when the entire world had to be taxed. They had to be taxed. And that's where Joseph and Mary were called, back to their native town of origin, of course, to Bethlehem, and to be able to pay the census and the tax. And I use that example as a metaphor that every single person in the world has a responsibility, an assignment to do a census of our senses and to take into account every single one of our five senses, our seeing, our smelling, our hearing, our tasting, our touching, experiencing, all the senses that we have. And when we do a census of our senses, when we take inventory, then that's when we can decipher and we can see what is the voice of God? What is the voice of my own soul? And what is the voice, as you mentioned, Archita, of fear dressed as intuition? And what is the voice of the enemy? What is the voice of darkness? And we know these things when we do a fruit test. We know a tree. Jesus said, you will know somebody, you will know something by its fruit. A tree can only produce the fruit that it has. Therefore, we can decipher what is the voice of God, what is the voice of our own soul, and what is a voice of fear dressed up as intuition when we do a fruit test, when we step back and we get into that MPA as I spoke about at the very beginning of the show, and we pivot away from the theater of pretense, the theater of bread and circus, because in Roman times, in the Colosseum, in the gladiator arenas, the crowds were fickle. They were drunk off of the blood of entertainment of gladiators dying in the arena, all for sport. And it was very much a game, a twisted game of entertainment. And the ones that suffered were the ones that were in the arena, either by their own will or many times forced against their own will. But we can step away from that arena. We can separate it from that arena of the soul, that arena of fear dressed as intuition. We can step away from that. We can shift away from that and into the theater of experiencing God's voice. And that all begins from stepping away from it and saying, God, enlighten my senses. I pray this prayer, the prayer of Paul and the message to the church of Ephesus, to the Ephesians. I pray that the eyes of my understanding would be enlightened and my heart would be opened to your voice, that you would enlighten my senses. I take a census of my senses and I ask for your light, God, to show me the way, to show me what is my own soul, to show me what is your voice, and to show me what is fear dressed as intuition. When you do that, when I do that, Achita, when our audience does that in India, whether you're in India, whether you're in Europe, whether you're in Australia, in Asia, in Africa, in South America, in North America, wherever you are in the world, and we do that, we can truly develop and grow our relationship with God and hearing his voice clearly.
That's powerful, and that distinction is very significant because a lot of people are calling panic a spiritual warning and calling peace laziness. So, we really need to make that distinction and really understand what is actually God's voice and what is our own intuition. So, we needed that call out for sure. Now, moving on, Caleb, you have been in New Age spaces and Bible college spaces. So, what did those worlds teach you about how people chase meaning in everything?
That there's a constant drive for purpose and finding the why between the why behind the what. And the big question mark that both the New Age audiences, the Bible college audiences, and all the other audiences I've spoken to, the big question that really is a similar thread across those environments is this: why am I here? What is my purpose in life? What is the DNA of my design? How am I pursuing that within my own day by day life? And what is the answer? How do I decode this puzzle that's my life in the day by day, in the night season? The inheritance of the historical timeline that I've come from, whether that be a good inheritance, or how do I unjumble the mess of maybe I had a really bad experience of just filling in the blanks for a scenario, but maybe a person that I encounter there has a bad upbringing, and how do you start over when you're having to turn the ship, when you're having to shift? And that is really a powerful question. And the New Age audiences and the Bible college audiences, they've reminded me that no matter what spiritual background the audiences that I'm speaking to, as human beings, because we all have this human construct, we all come back to the same aha moment. And that is, what is my purpose? How am I walking in my purpose? How am I walking in my DNA of design? that is what being in various environments and various groups and various people groups and cultures has taught me is, why am I here? And really, when that question is posed, it really is a fuel to take every moment captive and take advantage of every single situation, because these are these are precious, precious vials of time that will never be the same way again. Just like our podcast, just like your podcast, Cheetah, I Awaken, and just like Avik and every podcast in this beautiful network, and the podcasts are on Podmatch and beyond, the ones that our audience are listening to. These vials of time, these very, very precious pearls, these moments are can never be replicated again. And that's what really fuels me is, okay, this moment's only going to happen once. How can I make the most of it? Because people are looking for purpose.
Definitely, I absolutely agree because regardless of what spaces we belong to, at the end of the day, we are all just human beings and we have the same problems and we look for the same solutions. We seek for peace everywhere. So, yeah, like you said, we are all looking for purpose regardless of where we belong from. So, on that note, where do you think modern spirituality gets it right, and where do you think it quietly sabotages people?
Where modern spirituality gets it right is um, this new era that's coming where it's more of an entrepreneurial spirituality. And that really, boiling it down to, is this is a creativity of spirituality, of being able to take it mobile, just like the internet, just like what we're speaking on right now, a entrepreneurial spirituality that isn't underneath the iron fist of mediation or religious elitism or structure or law or being bound up in these archaic principles. That's where I believe that modern spirituality gets us right, is this pivot, this shift away from traditionalism, institutionalism, and more of a freedom as if for individuals to be able to take that with them and apply their own spirituality, their own connection with God, no matter where, no matter how, no matter what it means, a way that is cohesive to their DNA of design, to our DNA of design. That's where I think modern spirituality gets it right in certain pockets, and it's growing. It's starting to grow again. But with where it gets it wrong, where modern spirituality can sabotage our walk with God, is still reverting back to the tree of knowledge of good and evil, because in the garden there was two trees, right? In Genesis, there's a tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And it's human nature, unfortunately, to reach back into that dichotomous worldview, the soul and the body, and to really lean on our own understanding, to be conformed to the image of this world, which is structure, which is big stages and theater and laws and mediators and rules and regulations. And that's where I think modern spirituality gets it wrong, because there really is this east and west gap. There's this gulf, and I want to hear your thoughts on this too, Anchita. There really is this gap between two parties in the world system. We could paint a broad stroke for a minute here. There's these two parties. There's a one party, free spirited, moving spirituality that's not confined by mediators and abdication to mediation. And then there's still this traditional, structured modern spirituality that insists on man-made mediators. And we can see through the life of Jesus in the scriptures that he definitely did not believe in mediation. He believed in a kingdom of priests. That'd be what we're supposed to be as a people, is a free, entrepreneurial, free moving kingdom of priests where we have our own relationship with God. That's where I think the great gap is, where modern spirituality gets it right, and then where it gets it wrong is the insistence on abdication to mediation. But what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you on a lot of things. I mean, definitely modern spirituality has both its pros and cons. But I also feel like there, between the two worlds that you just that you just said exists, I feel like there is also gray area in between. So on one hand, like how you said, modern spirituality, it's developing more and more entrepreneurship, which is turning spirituality into kind of a business. But on the other hand, it is also helping a lot of people. So there is a lot of debate on it, but I love that you can hold nuance here, like you're not demonizing curiosity, you're just bringing discernment back into the room. So it just depends on the perspective. But yeah, I absolutely agree with you. uh so, Caleb, lastly, let's talk about dreams. You have interpreted thousands of dreams. So, why do you think that dreams matter in the spiritual sense?
because they take up such a large portion of our lives. One third of our lives are spent in the season of the night in dreaming. By the time we reach 60 years of age, we'll have slept 20 years of our life. That's a big portion of our human construct of our timeline on the earth. And they're so important in regards to the bridge between our spirit, our spirituality, our spirit in connection with our spirituality, and across that bridge to our natural lives, because they are roadmaps, they are codes. We can look back in history and see examples of Alexander the Great, of Harriet Tubman, of different people like George Washington, and different people through history, through the history books, men and women throughout the ages that followed their dreams of the night season as codes, as roadmaps. And they're as much human as we are. They were as much human as we are. And therefore, if they could follow their dreams as roadmaps, we can follow our dreams as maps, as codes to be deciphered. And really, we stand back and ask ourselves this question: what is this a picture of? It. I'm glossing over this really quickly because I've been really in the dream warpath on the just on the journey, this epic journey of understanding dreams since I was 6 years old, and I went to a dream interpretation school at the age of 18. I was raised in a homeschooling environment where dreams were treasured, and I just want to give our audience a little bit of a practical takeaway, and that is, you're having these dreams, and you're like, why is this important? Okay, they spend a big portion of my life in the dream state. Okay, I can see that, Caleb. Now, how do I start to unpackage that? Well, here's how you do it. Ask yourself this question when you wake up from your dream: what is this a picture of? What is God trying to say to me? And then once you start asking yourself this question, just write the dream out, whether it be a long dream or a short dream. Doesn't matter if your dreams are short or long. That's not really the deciphering factor into how they're important, because oftentimes our soul gets in the way and you think, okay, if I have a long dream, that means it's more important than a shorter one. No, no, all dreams are equal in this sense, is that there's always going to be a treasure behind each one. So write your dream down, because if you write your dream down, dream recollection within your neural pathways and your brain pathways and your subconscious, it's proven that when you write something down, you're more likely to remember it. So write it down, ask yourself what this is a picture of, and start to really cultivate that lifestyle of dreaming, because there's a huge, huge chunk of your life that is just waiting to be discovered. And when you start to discover that it changes the whole dynamic of how you operate from the world perspective as a human living in day by day life.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. That was very helpful, Caleb. I'm sure that our listeners are definitely going to practice this from now on. And it was also important because people either ignore dreams completely or they turn one weird dream into a full identity crisis by breakfast. So yeah, that would be helpful. But I've also, I think I read somewhere that we only remember 1% of the dream that we saw. So, which is, I think it's, if it is true, then it's pretty scary, because if we remember a lot, and if that's just the 1%, then imagine what the rest of the 99% would be. That's pretty interesting as well. But yeah, we are yeah, we have reached the end of the time, and it's time to wrap up the podcast today. But such an enlightening conversation this has been, Caleb, and I am sure that the listeners would now want to connect with you on a deeper level. So if they want to do that, how can they do that? Could you share with them?
Yes, absolutely, Archita. That would be, you can find me a few different ways. First of all, my the C-Link website, www.calebmatthews.net. You can see my past podcasts like this one on there, archive library of content for that. My YouTube channel, a lot of my content from there is there as well. My YouTube channel, of course, is very important as well. www.youtube.com/at the C-Link. It would mean the world to me if you loved what I shared today. You're like, okay, that resonates with me. I don't know about that, but I want to hear more and just like really curious. Then please hit subscribe on my YouTube channel at the C-Link. I would love to have you on the journey. I've got motivational weekly content that's on there that will inspire and uplift and encourage you to see the links in your life day by day and in the night season. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at the C Link. Both of those are the same, so it's easy to find me at the C Link on Instagram and Twitter. Thank you so much, Archita. This has been wonderful on I Awaken. It's always something that I look forward to whenever I'm on any of Avik's podcast, any of you with, Sana, with Yusuf, with, Shreya, and of course yourself, Archita, and many more. You are a treasure, a delight, and you are changing lives. But thank you so much. And audience, you will reach the purpose to which you've been created. Keep on pursuing the MPA, that multiple perspective advantage, and ask yourself and ask God most of all, why am I here? And let his voice speak to you. Thank you, Archita, for having me on the show. Truly an
Thank
honor.
you. Thank you, Caleb. And yeah, that means a lot. And to our listeners, before you go, here's a simple mini challenge for the next 24 hours. Firstly, pick one moment today, morning, midday, or night. Set a timer for 3 minutes and do this. Firstly, mute the world, which means no phone, no music, nothing. Secondly, breathe slowly and ask God, what are you saying to me right now? Thirdly, write down the first three words that comes to your mind, not a paragraph, just three words. Then check your fruit. Does it bring peace, clarity, courage, conviction, love, or steadiness? If yes, follow it one small step. Because hearing God isn't about being mystical, it's about being available. If today's episode hit home, share it with someone who has been craving clarity but drowning in noise. And if you're listening on your favorite platform, then drop a review. It helps more seekers find the space. Caleb, thank you for bringing wisdom with warmth and making the deep stuff usable. And to you listening, stay open, stay grounded, keep awakening. I'll see you in the next episode of I Awaken.